You think the Great Depression meant empty plates and tasteless gruel? Think again. Our ancestors stretched pennies into feasts, turning scraps and imagination into meals that kept families alive through America's darkest decade. Let's dig into 60 cheap 1930s dishes our ancestors ate to survive. Long before Irish coffee graced brunch menus, Depression-era Americans navigated the dry years of Prohibition by quietly spiking their mugs with homemade liquor, blending two beloved national pastimes into one rebellious concoction: coffee mixed with alcohol. This clandestine cocktail wasn't exactly advertised in Ladies' Home Journal, yet it became a common workaround, disguising illicit moonshine or bootleg whiskey in plain sight during breakfast, proving caffeine was useful for more than just waking up. Preparation was straightforward, though rarely discussed openly. Strong coffee masked the questionable taste of illegal moonshine or bathtub gin, resulting in an eye-opening beverage that delivered both caffeine jitters and an illegal buzz. Newspapers occasionally joked that Prohibition turned average coffee drinkers into accidental outlaws, sipping discreetly to avoid suspicious neighbors or nosy officers. While Prohibition officially ended in 1933, mixing alcohol and coffee never disappeared entirely. It just became legally and socially acceptable again, minus the secrecy. Interestingly, modern laws now regulate alcoholic caffeine mixtures strictly due to legitimate health concerns. Excessive caffeine masks alcohol's intoxicating effects, increasing risky behaviors and health dangers. Onion sandwiches were a really simple meal that worked perfectly as a Depression-era breakfast. Red onions, green onions, normal ones, anything that people could get their hands on worked. Onions were also really filling thanks to the incredible amount of flavor they come with, and if you bother with caramelizing them and using a few scraps of leftover meat or pig parts, then you actually have yourself an almost solid meal. Raw onions have a pretty pungent taste, but people used to eat sandwiches filled with those too. People found themselves eating all kinds of meals that pretty much just extended their pantry as much as possible. The taste, flavor, and how good it felt, all of that wasn't even the third or fourth priority. Onion sandwiches are also pretty self-explanatory. There's not a lot to go over with this dish, but it is interesting how people adopted practices from other cultures. For example, in Southeast Asian communities in America, it was very common to consume raw onions with curries and bread or carbs. Vinegar. While city rats today might prompt a frantic call to pest control, desperate times during the Great Depression transformed these rodents from street menace to last resort protein. Eating rat meat wasn't common practice, but urban families facing starvation did indeed resort to capturing and cooking these widely detested animals. Rat meat required meticulous cleaning, soaking in brine or vinegar, and thorough cooking at high temperatures, usually roasted or simmered into stews heavily seasoned to disguise its origins. Historical accounts indicate that rat dinners emerged mostly from extreme necessity rather than culinary experimentation, with some cooks humorously admitting the biggest challenge was convincing diners it tasted almost like rabbit, provided they didn't think too hard about it. Naturally, health concerns arose from consuming urban rodents, notorious carriers of disease. Think plague and leptospirosis, conditions more serious than indigestion after Thanksgiving dinner. These legitimate dangers pushed health authorities to unequivocally declare rat meat illegal and unsafe, permanently closing down any possibility of a rat roast revival. Modern laws reflect clear public health priorities, strictly forbidding consumption of rodents, classifying them as dangerous vermin rather than viable food sources. Split pea cakes are another example of how often peas and beans were the saving grace of American households during the Depression. The best thing about these things was arguably how easy they were to make. All you had to do was boil them, which meant that lots of people could effectively use this recipe. Some of the Depression-era recipes straight up just don't apply to people who don't have certain kitchen appliances or ovens or a steady supply of electricity. Split peas were something everyone had, from urban areas to outskirts and rural ones. It also helped that split peas worked so well with the kinds of things people already had on hand. A binder, like all-purpose flour or some mashed potatoes, was also really helpful in holding the mix together. Plus, they went great with potatoes overall. The thing is, though, and this is really important in why people chose cakes over easier meals, is because people sorely missed sweets. Thanks to the Depression, basically any item that could be used for baking or even just for a change of taste wasn't something you'd ever find anymore. It was too expensive, too costly, and it meant that people never got the desserts they grew up with. That really dampened people's spirits all year round, and peas were common enough that people could spare some for a cake once a week. Watermelon rind packaged pork chops arrived wrapped in cellophane at supermarkets. Families in Depression-era America took matters and meat cleavers into their own hands. Home-slaughtered pigs without inspection weren't just rural tradition, they were economic necessity, a direct route from the backyard pig pen to dinner plates nationwide. Neighbors often gathered together, turning butchering day into a social event, perhaps the original farm-to-table movement, minus the trendy menus. Pork cuts were carefully salted, smoked, cured or canned in cellars without official oversight, and sausages stuffed by hand provided protein all winter. Interestingly, nearly every part found a use, including rendering fat for lard or transforming scraps into sausage, a testament to Depression-era thriftiness. Yet these home-slaughtered practices carried hidden dangers. Unsupervised slaughter led to contamination risks, including trichinosis outbreaks and food poisoning incidents that pushed authorities toward regulation. Today, selling home-slaughtered pork without USDA inspection isn't just risky. It's illegal nationwide, intended to protect public health and ensure humane animal treatment standards. So the thing about Depression-era cooking was that it led people to places they never thought they'd go to. Previously, we actually discussed in detail how people started using all of the pig. What you probably didn't think was that this meant literally everything. Yes, even the feet. Pickled pig's feet were one of the best things to go for if we're talking about people who drew the short end of the stick during the Depression. Not all economic stress was equal. People that were living in urban hubs, especially the big-name states and cities, had it much better than local towns and rural populations that were struggling to keep going. These parts of the pig, often considered offal, were not sold at market rate prices, and usually were a lot cheaper than other cuts of meat. The thing with those cuts was that even if they were available, which they rarely were since they were also being rationed heavily, they'd leave quite a Lane cake originated in Alabama and reached peak popularity during the 1950s Christmas seasons when Southern hostesses competed to produce the most impressive version. The cake layers were simple white or yellow cake, but the filling was where ambition met tradition. Pecans, coconut, raisins, and maraschino cherries were folded into rich custard, then generously spiked with bourbon or brandy. Some recipes called for so much liquor the cake needed days to age, allowing the alcohol to mellow and permeate every layer. The frosting was fluffy, white-boiled icing providing contrast to the boozy fruit. Peanut butter fudge required no chocolate at all, stretching pantry staples into creamy candy that rivaled expensive confections. Peanut butter, sugar, milk, and butter cooked together until the mixture reached soft ball stage, then beat until thick and creamy. Poured into a buttered pan, the fudge set into squares that were rich, sweet, and intensely peanutty. The recipe used ingredients most families already had, making it possible to produce holiday candy without a special shopping. Imported French soft cheeses like Brie and Camembert were once luxuries reserved for the curious and the cultured. Their rich aroma and creamy texture symbolized sophistication in post-war America. But that very richness became their downfall. Because these cheeses were made with unpasteurized milk, they fell under strict import bans during the 1950s. Health authorities warned that they could carry bacteria like Listeria or Brucella, posing unseen dangers to expectant mothers and infants. Gourmet shops were forced to remove them, and travelers returning from Europe had their cheeses confiscated at customs. The crackdown drew a line between romance and risk. For many Americans, it was their first taste of global regulation, where culture met caution at the border. Pasteurized versions arrived soon after, but connoisseurs swore they never tasted the same. A creamy dream had been sterilized into submission. Canned baby. An era when practicality trumped sentimentality, even the family pet wasn't always off-limits as a main course. Pet rabbits for meat became common during the Great Depression, as families raised them not just for fluffy companionship, but also as a convenient dinner solution. Surprisingly tender and mild-tasting, rabbit meat was commonly fried, stewed, or baked into pies after soaking overnight in buttermilk or vinegar to reduce gamminess. Because nothing ruins a Depression-era Sunday dinner quite like unwanted backyard flavor. Raising rabbits was uniquely economical, as these fluffy companions conveniently doubled as livestock, feeding on grass and garden scraps and multiplying at legendary speeds. There's a reason we still joke about rabbits' reproductive enthusiasm today. However, attitudes toward rabbits changed dramatically in post-war America. As people increasingly viewed these long-eared animals strictly as cuddly household companions rather than dinner options, cultural taboos strengthened significantly. Modern urban zoning regulations often explicitly forbid slaughtering animals considered pets, making it not just socially questionable but legally risky to prepare rabbit dinners at home in populated areas. Parsnip bread is actually a bit more complicated than you would think. It's a root vegetable that people use as a substitute for more expensive stuff like sugar or sweeteners that they otherwise couldn't access. Now again, this was more a requirement for people who had spent their lives living in cities and were used to having additives and preservatives in everything they bought and ate, which is why they weren't used to not having sweeteners. Parsnips are actually naturally pretty sweet, and that fact only becomes a lot more apparent if you roast them or boil them. Luckily, this was one recipe that could be a lot more widespread in the country thanks to the way it didn't require any kind of kitchen appliances like ovens. No baking or anything, just plain old boiling and roasting. The ingredients were a bit of a financial barrier though, because you did need things like white flour and baking soda. People substituted that with a mixture of a little bit of white flour and whole wheat, and it worked for the most part. The sugar that people did have, they would add really sparingly. The bread would rise very well too, which meant that it was the perfect thing to go for when your bread was stale, running out, and you had nothing left to work with. People would usually enjoy apple stack cake. Emerged from Appalachian kitchens as a communal Christmas tradition where neighbors each contributed a layer to build a towering holiday centerpiece. Unlike conventional layer cakes, this one used thin, cookie-like layers made from simple dough enriched with sorghum or molasses. Between each layer went thick spread of dried apple filling, cooked with spices until dark and sticky. The assembled cake was wrapped and left to rest for days, during which moisture from the filling softened dry layers into tenderness. The number of layers in a bride's apple stack cake once indicated her popularity, with more layers meaning more friends had contributed. Christmas versions might tower 8 or 10 layers high, testament to community bonds and shared tradition. The flavor was unlike any other, more reminiscent of cornstarch pudding was the blank canvas of 1950s desserts, a simple vanilla base that could become anything a creative cook imagined. Cornstarch, sugar, milk, and vanilla cooked together until thickened into silky pudding that cost mere pennies per serving. Chocolate versions added cocoa powder, butterscotch used brown sugar and butter, and banana pudding layered the vanilla base with sliced fruit and wafers. The pudding could be served warm in bowls or chilled until firm and sliceable. Families who could not afford expensive bakery items found that cornstarch pudding satisfied sweet cravings just as well. Children loved watching the thin milk transform into thick, glossy pudding right before their eyes. Topped with whipped cream or crushed mayonnaise, salads were the highlight of every summer picnic, creamy, tangy, and loaded with diced eggs, potatoes, or macaroni. But as the 1950s wore on, those same dishes turned from beloved to feared. Reports of salmonella poisoning began sweeping through cities, traced back to Sunny Park lunches and roadside gatherings. The culprit was simple: mayonnaise left sitting too long in the heat. Health campaigns flooded newspapers with warnings, urging families to keep their salads cold or not serve them at all. The era of carefree picnic spreads was over. Portable coolers were still rare, so the risk felt unavoidable. Churches canceled potlucks, and homemakers swapped creamy salads for vinegar-based slaws. It was a small change with a big cultural impact. The summer table lost some of its warmth, traded for safety and suspicion. What had once been a symbol of togetherness was now a headline about foodborne fear. Salt Inspector. In cities struggling through the Great Depression, hungry families frequently turned to their local waterways for sustenance, pulling dinner straight from rivers that today would make even industrial chemists hesitate. Eating fish from polluted rivers wasn't exactly gourmet dining, but it was survival cooking at its most pragmatic. Catfish, carp, and perch were typically breaded, fried, or baked with onions and potatoes to mask muddy flavors, a method that probably made diners thankful the river's taste didn't seep through too strongly. Even back then, though, residents jokingly admitted their fish dinners had a hint of motor oil, hardly a selling point, but better than going hungry. Public health warnings of the era were minimal. Pollutants like mercury, PCBs, and industrial chemicals weren't widely understood yet, leaving fishermen blissfully unaware of their toxic supper. Eventually, environmental awareness and science caught up to common sense. By the 1970s, federal laws like the Clean Water Act drastically limited fishing in contaminated waters, explicitly labeling certain rivers off-limits due to severe health risks linked to cancer and neurological disorders. Honey and cracklins were a big Southern staple, both in and outside of the Great Depression. While they were always very appreciated for the fact that it was such an inexpensive and filling meal, especially whenever money was tight, the history behind them is tied a little bit to the nature of the land itself. See, hominy is made from corn kernels, and a very specific type of kernel too. These ones are typically treated with lye or lime, and this is done so that the hulls of the kernels are removed. What this does is it makes them more digestible. Still, why does that make them such an accessible option? Well, both cracklings and hominy come from two things that are always in abundance in the South, and if you've ever been there, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Pigs and corn are two things you just can't run out of up there, even if you tried. Chicharrones are things that we've already gone over. That fried pork fat is something the South can never let go of. Hominy works so well because, agriculturally speaking, the South is really good for growing corn. It's one of their top products and crops, and that hasn't changed even in the 21st century. Jam cake was a spice-filled wonder that transformed pantry staples into holiday splendor across Southern and Midwestern kitchens. Blackberry jam was the traditional choice, folded into batter rich with buttermilk, spices, and sometimes cocoa, creating moist cake with fruity sweetness throughout. The jam provided both flavor and moisture, making the cake tender and forgiving even for less experienced bakers. Caramel frosting was the classic accompaniment, its burnt sugar notes complementing the berry-laced crumb perfectly. Some families used whatever jam they had preserved from summer gardens, meaning each year's cake tasted different depending on harvest. The cake was dense enough to slice cleanly yet moist enough to melt in the mouth. Christmas baking often meant pulling out the last precious jars of summer preserves, transforming them into holiday splendor. Jam cake represented farmhouse tradition of wasting nothing. Soda cracker pie fooled everyone into thinking they were eating apple pie when no apples existed anywhere in the recipe at all. Crushed soda crackers soaked in a syrup of sugar, water, lemon juice, and cream of tartar somehow transformed into something that tasted remarkably like cooked apples. The chemical reaction between the acidic ingredients and the plain crackers created flavors and textures that mimicked fruit with uncanny accuracy that fooled even skeptics. Baked in a double crust with cinnamon sprinkled throughout, the pie emerged golden and fragrant, its filling soft. Tinned sardines in cottonseed oil were once a cheap, portable miracle. They were packed into every pantry, lunchbox, and survival kit, an emblem of convenience before fast food even had a name. But as reports of rancid oils and contamination grew, trust in the humble tin began to rot too. The cottonseed oil, cheap and abundant, proved unstable under heat and storage. The fish took on strange flavors, and entire batches spoiled before they could be sold. When testing revealed toxins forming in the oil itself, the Food and Drug Administration stepped in. Imports were seized, and domestic producers quietly switched to safer oils like olive and soybean. For the first time, Americans began to question the safety of canned goods once seen as untouchable. The sardine, a war hero and working-class staple, suddenly became suspect. And as the tins vanished from shelves, so too did a little of the trust that had built the post-war convenience boom. Tough economic times, resourcefulness often triumphed over squeamishness, and few dishes captured this gritty ingenuity better than the infamous roadkill stew. During the Great Depression, families faced with empty pantries saw opportunity in freshly struck animals, deer, rabbits, raccoons, lying roadside, turning these unfortunate encounters into nourishing meals. After inspection, mostly visual, food safety rules were looser back then, the carcasses were quickly skinned, cleaned, and tossed into pots bubbling with potatoes, onions, carrots, and herbs. Cookbooks from the 1930s humorously cautioned cooks to select only recently deceased creatures, advising that tire tracks were a less-than-ideal seasoning. Surprisingly, this improvised delicacy wasn't just rural folklore. City folks, too, adopted roadkill recipes as an economical alternative to expensive butcher shop meat. Today, however, collecting roadside meals has moved from economical practicality to legal controversy. Many states now strictly regulate or outright forbid harvesting roadkill, citing health hazards from bacteria, parasites, and unknown diseases, not to mention wildlife preservation laws designed to prevent poaching disguised as scavenging. Crackling cornbread is a pretty traditional Southern dish that comes right out of the family cookbooks of this decade, so that should tell you something about how much grandmas loved it. Crackling cornbread sounds a lot more climactic than it really is, though, so let's go through what makes it so crackling. Basically, they're made with chicharrones, or otherwise known as pork cracklings. These are crispy fried bits of fat that were rendered when the pork was being cooked, and they most typically come from the fat back or the skin of a pig. Now, one bit of time-specific context that's really important here is that people were using every part of the pig they could back then. Crackling cornbread was another variation of that kind of mentality where people really wanted to not let anything go to waste, especially the pig. Why was the pig so special, though? Well, unlike chickens, ducks, and even beef, the pig was the only animal that had use outside of the plate, too. You could use its bones for fig cake. Celebrated the sweet, honey-flavored fruit that grew abundantly across the southern United States during the 1950s. Home gardeners often had more figs than they could possibly eat fresh, so canning and preserving them became essential skills. Fig preserves were folded into spiced cake batter, creating a moist, dense cake with pockets of fruit throughout. The figs contributed natural sweetness along with a distinctive flavor that nothing else could replicate. Cream cheese frosting or simple powdered sugar glaze provided contrast to the rich, spiced crumb. Some bakers used dried figs that had been plumped in brandy, adding another layer of complexity to the flavor profile. Fig cake was often made from baked apples filled 1950s homes with the scent of cinnamon and brown sugar, transforming affordable fruit into individual holiday desserts that made everyone feel special. Rome or Granny Smith apples were cored and filled with a mixture of brown sugar, butter, cinnamon, and sometimes raisins or chopped nuts. Baked until tender and bubbling, each apple became its own service, the color of childhood itself. Bright cherry candies, popsicles, and sweet cereals all gleamed with it. Then the headlines came. Scientists warning of cancer links, parents panicking, and lawmakers rushing to respond. The once innocent color became a symbol of everything people feared about synthetic additives. Candy factories were forced to reformulate, and grocery shelves turned duller overnight. The ban was more than a regulation. It was an awakening. Americans realized that even the most cheerful hues could hide danger. For a nation obsessed with convenience and appearance, that was a bitter truth to swallow. Red candies without the familiar glow looked sadder, emptier, somehow less alive. But for many, the risk no longer seemed worth the shine. The ban left behind more than faded sweets. It left behind a lasting suspicion of anything too bright to be real. Pot Depression-era families did with canned goods without expiration dates or labels. Back then, home canning wasn't just tradition. It was an absolute lifeline, with families routinely sealing meat, vegetables, and fruits inside recycled glass jars or tins, blissfully unconcerned about pesky details like expiration dates or ingredient lists. Dinner often became a surprise mystery meat special. Moms called it creativity. Kids might have called it something else entirely. Cooks would boil these unlabeled contents vigorously, hoping to reduce health risks, though botulism remained a lurking threat even then. Ironically, food safety guidelines of that era were minimal at best, and illnesses frequently resulted from guesswork gone wrong. Eventually, federal food labeling laws and regulations emerged, driven by serious health scares linked directly to unidentified canned goods. Today, selling unlabeled or undated food isn't just unsafe, it's explicitly illegal, with strict FDA requirements on labeling and freshness dates designed to prevent illness and confusion alike. At a time when peanut butter gravy on rice is a fantastic example of how inventive people were during the Depression. See, the thing about this is that peanut butter was one of the best things you could buy during the Depression for several reasons. If the constant use of lard didn't tip you off, people were really treasuring fat wherever they could find it. Secondly, people needed as much protein as they could afford to get or forage. Peanut butter was luckily proficiently loaded in both of these things, but on top of that, it was also pretty cheap. It was one of the best sources of protein and fat within that price range. You might wonder how they got a gravy going out of this, though. Well, you'd add some water or milk, usually water, and something to thicken the gravy with, like all-purpose flour. If people could spare it, just a bit of margarine for some more richness and basic seasoned slice cake transformed the humble candy into a holiday confection that sparkled with color and sweetness. Orange slice candies were chopped and folded into a rich batter along with dates, pecans, and coconut, creating a cake studded with jewel-like pieces. The candy melted slightly during baking, leaving chewy pockets of citrus flavor throughout the dense crumb. Bakers made this cake weeks before Christmas, knowing it improved with age as the flavors melded and the texture mellowed. The cake was often baked in tube pans and glazed with a mixture of orange juice and powdered sugar that soaked in and added another layer of citrus brightness. Some recipes called for soaking the cake in bourbon or rum, transforming it into something approaching fruitcake territory. Sliced thin, the cake revealed its hidden treasures, the orange pieces glowing against the golden crumb. Orange slice cake represented the creation. Divinity candy looked like clouds fallen from heaven and tasted like pure sweetness, crystallized into pillowy mounds that melted on the tongue. Sugar, corn syrup, and water cooked to hard ball stage, then beaten into stiff egg whites until the mixture turned glossy white and held its shape when dropped. Spooned onto waxed paper in small mounds, each piece set into a delicate confection that dissolved instantly. The recipe required patience and good weather. Humidity made divinity sticky and sad. But success meant impressive candy that looked completely store-bought. Pecans or walnuts pressed into each piece added welcome. Margarine turned into one of the strangest food wars of the 1950s. Dairy farmers saw it as a threat to their livelihood, a cheap imitation stealing butter's golden glow. State after state passed laws banning yellow margarine, forcing companies to sell it as a pale, unappetizing white slab. In some places, you had to mix your own coloring packet at home just to make it look edible. The butter wars became a battle between old-fashioned tradition and modern convenience. Families who couldn't afford butter felt punished for trying to stretch their grocery budgets. Politicians called the dye deceptive. Homemakers called the laws ridiculous. In truth, it was never really about color. It was about control. Food was becoming industrial, and the fight for margarine's hue symbolized something deeper. Who had the right to decide what Americans ate? Eventually, the bans faded, but the lesson lingered. Sometimes, the biggest battles over food have nothing to do with taste at all. Coca-Cola. Desperation tightened its grip in the Great Depression. Even the backyard robins and sparrows became fair game. Commonly known as songbirds, these feathered neighbors found themselves starring unwillingly in Depression-era dishes. Families employed homemade snares, nets, and carefully aimed slingshots to secure their tiny meals. Once captured, the birds, typically robins, sparrows, or blackbirds, were plucked, gutted, and roasted whole over open fires or baked with potatoes and onions into miniature pies. Interestingly, a 1930s household recipe even recommended skewering songbirds, seasoning lightly, and cooking rapidly, likely the original, less glamorous predecessor to today's fancy hors d'oeuvres. But this culinary trend, born purely of necessity rather than preference, soon faced heavy legal scrutiny. The Migratory Bird Treaty Act, established earlier but strictly enforced post-Depression, outlawed hunting, capturing, or consuming migratory songbirds to prevent their declining populations. Today, violating these regulations could result in hefty fines or even imprisonment, making songbird skewers a costly dish indeed. Beet greens with vinegar show a lot of the lifestyle choices that people were making and gravitating towards during the Depression. Simple things, filling meals, dishes that had a lot more health benefits than fancy tastes or European twists. Families were really struggling to afford just about anything meat-related, so they clutched the vegetables that were similar to it, whether that was in texture or taste, as closely as they could to their chests. They'd take beet greens from a bunch of beets and a tablespoon of vinegar. Then, some bacon grease or vegetable oil would work. If you were using fresh greens, then you would usually trim the stems and leaves. But people would even save these because you could use the leaves to sew holes in clothes or the stems for medicinal treatments. The best part about this dish was again that you could pretty much just make it over an open fire. It was a bit tricky to make because the greens were really prone to wilting as they cooked, which is naturally what happens, so people really reached out to their neighbors for once with help in how to perfect the root cake. Emerged as a Christmas showstopper during the 1950s, its dramatic crimson layers making it perfect for holiday tables. The original color came from the reaction between cocoa and acidic buttermilk, producing a subtle reddish hue that bakers enhanced with beet juice or red food coloring. The texture was unlike any other cake, tender, fine crumbed, and slightly tangy from the buttermilk and vinegar in the batter. Cream cheese frosting became the traditional accompaniment, its tang perfectly balancing the cake's subtle chocolate flavor. The Waldorf Astoria Hotel helped popularize the recipe, and soon home bakers everywhere were attempting their own versions. Slicing into a red velvet cake was always dramatic, the vivid red interior contrasting beautifully with white frosting. Mothers saved this upside-down cake made canned fruit into a showstopper dessert that never failed to impress holiday guests. Brown sugar and butter melted together in a cast-iron skillet, topped with pineapple rings and maraschino cherries that became the cake's jeweled crown. Simple yellow cake batter poured over the fruit baked into golden perfection, then flipped dramatically to reveal the caramelized topping. Canned pineapple cost far less than fresh and was available year-round, making this impressive dessert accessible to every budget. The cake required only one pan and basic pantry ingredients, yet looked like it came from an expensive bakery. Children loved the sweet cherry. Absinthe had already been banned in the United States for decades, but the 1950s brought its ghost back into the spotlight. The green liqueur, infamous in Europe for its supposed hallucinogenic powers, was condemned all over again. Post-war America wanted stability, morality, and clean living, and absinthe represented everything it feared: indulgence, madness, and foreign decadence. The wormwood used to make it was accused of driving drinkers insane, a myth the media was all too happy to revive. When European imports tried to sneak their way back into American bars, customs agents seized them like contraband. The ban was reaffirmed, and absinthe returned to the realm of legend. It was the outlaw drink of poets and painters, far too wild for a nation chasing suburban perfection. By the 1950s, absinthe's glow faded into myth, replaced by sanitized cocktails and American whiskeys. What had once symbolized artistic rebellion was now a relic of sins no one dared to repeat. When food budgets shrank dramatically in Depression-era America, backyard creatures found themselves promoted from pests to pot roast. Among these unlikely dinner guests was the humble opossum, famously cooked into dishes such as opossum pot roast. Preparation involved meticulous attention, first soaking the meat overnight in salted water, then carefully removing excess fat before slowly roasting alongside sweet potatoes, onions, carrots, and apples. Cookbooks from that time proudly featured detailed opossum recipes, reassuring skeptical home chefs that the meat was tender, mild-flavored, and almost as good as pork, though likely no opossum ever felt flattered by the comparison. Historically significant in southern states, the opossum was even humorously honored at community possum suppers, where neighbors gathered, possibly wondering if dinner had recently visited their own porch. However, modern dining etiquette and strict wildlife regulations have largely removed opossum from American menus. Health officials today strongly advise against eating opossums due to risks of diseases like leptospirosis and parasites unaffected by standard cooking temperatures. Many states now regulate or ban trapping and consumption of these marsupials altogether, highlighting safety concerns over nostalgia. So, the thing about lard biscuits was that it was essentially too available. Lards pretty much just rendered pig fat, if you weren't familiar. Sometimes, people use cooking fat to add flavor and texture to a dish, and it helps to really make it an overall more filling meal. Now, since most of the urbanization hadn't taken place yet in America yet, and there were still loads of rural areas to go around, lard biscuits became very common. They were far more affordable than butter or oil, which is what you would usually use for your cooking if you had some spare change you didn't need to hold on to. It became such a common element of Southern cooking that it also eventually just became a tradition that people associated with the region. It's now a deeply ingrained part of American culture. Historically, biscuits were a big part of the way people lived in the South during hard times of the Depression. Leavening agents were really just the most worrisome part of the entire haul. You get baking powder and baking soda, which helps a lot in making the biscuits rise. You want your cookies fluffy, after all, not chewy and soggy. Now, the people would usually cut lard into the dry stuff, such as the flour and baking powder. Since flour was a rarity, most people used Baltimore cake was the grande dame of Southern Christmas baking. A towering white layer cake with filling so complex it required its own recipe card. The cake was delicate white, made with egg whites only, producing ethereal texture that melted on the tongue. The filling was the star, a boiled frosting mixed with chopped figs, raisins, pecans, and candied cherries, creating sweet and chewy contrast to the tender crumb. The entire cake was enrobed in more fluffy white frosting, creating pristine. Jell-O salad doubled as dessert during the 1950s, when gelatin molds graced every holiday table and cost mere pennies to prepare. A single box of flavored gelatin could be stretched with canned fruit, nuts, and whipped topping to serve 8 or more people generously. Red and green versions made natural Christmas centerpieces, their jewel-like colors glowing under dining room lights. Children loved the wobble and jiggle, while adults appreciated the light sweetness after heavy holiday meals. Methyl alcohol in homemade vanilla extracts turned sweetness into poison. During the 1950s, with vanilla prices soaring, bootleg flavorings flooded markets and home kitchens alike. People mixed industrial-grade alcohol with vanilla beans, unaware that methyl alcohol was toxic. The result was tragedy: blindness, sickness, and even death. When authorities discovered the scale of the problem, they moved fast. Homemade extracts were confiscated and warnings plastered across newspapers. Families that had relied on their own recipes now feared their kitchens. The ban was swift and absolute. Methyl alcohol was outlawed in any food product. In its place came factory-sealed bottles stamped with purity labels. It was another sign of the times: home ingenuity giving way to industrial assurance. Vanilla, once the warm scent of comfort, now carried the cold shadow of caution. Unrefrigerated. In the humid summers of the South and Midwest during the Depression, resourceful cooks dipped ladles into bubbling pots filled with a delicacy now hidden behind a shield of wildlife protections: wild turtle soup made from snapping turtles. Highly regarded for its supposed medicinal properties, this dish combined turtle meat with vegetables and spices in a slow-cooked broth, sometimes enriched with sherry, giving it a sophisticated flair despite its humble swamp origins. Catching snapping turtles required skill and caution. These prehistoric-looking creatures packed jaws powerful enough to snap broom handles, making dinner prep almost as dangerous as it was economical. Cookbooks of the era suggested that turtle meat contained 7 distinct flavors, though skeptical diners joked it tasted mostly like swamp chicken. Overhunting and declining populations eventually forced state governments to step in, enacting strict laws and bans protecting snapping turtles from commercial harvest. Today, turtle trapping is highly regulated or illegal altogether in several states, particularly where species are considered endangered or threatened. Cowpea stew is another example of how black-eyed peas are a cultural pillar of many communities, especially the American South. It was such a common thing to see in family cookbooks, community cookbooks, and even the government pushed for people to start using more of this. Cowpea stew would typically just look like the black-eyed peas and a little bit of fat just for flavor. People used vegetables such as onions and garlic, carrots or potatoes, and then herbs like parsley and thyme. Dried black-eyed peas were also something that was not only available in bulk, but was also something that was really commonly grown throughout the South. Lots of places that had farming land or had traditions of growing their own food were living marginally better during the Depression because of how they were used to treating food the way people were starting to. Conservatively, with intention and planning, cowpea stew was actually a special dish because it was one of the few things that didn't feel like you were stretching it. Lots of the stuff on here, like potato peel soups and lard with toast. Hickory nut cake was a regional treasure showcasing wild nuts gathered from American forests each autumn. In areas where hickory trees grew abundantly, families spent fall weekends cracking notoriously hard shells to extract small, intensely flavored nut meats. The nuts had richer, more complex flavor than commercial walnuts or pecans, with slight bitterness perfect for baking. The cake was typically butter-rich pound cake or spice cake, with hickory nuts folded into batter and pressed onto frosting. Some recipes called for brown sugar or caramel frosting, complementing the nuts' earthy sweetness. Gathering and cracking hickory nuts was communal activity, with families sharing labor and bounty. The cakes carried connection to land and seasons that store-bought ingredients could never replicate. Graham cracker cake required no oven at all, making it perfect for busy holiday kitchens where the stove was already occupied with dinner. Layers of graham crackers were stacked with sweetened whipped cream or vanilla pudding between them, then refrigerated overnight until the crackers softened into cake-like layers. The transformation was almost magical, crisp crackers becoming tender and yielding, absorbing the cream until they melted on the tongue. Chocolate pudding variations created a dessert that rivaled expensive bakery cakes in appearance and satisfaction. The whole thing cost a fraction of traditional layer cakes and required no baking skill whatsoever. Food coloring in pickles and relishes once made the simplest foods sparkle like gemstones. Bright greens, yellows, and reds filled every grocery shelf, their glass jars gleaming like carnival lights under fluorescent store bulbs. Housewives loved the illusion, freshness sealed tight months or even years after bottling. But curiosity soon turned to suspicion. How could something trapped in a jar still shine like it had just come from the garden? When scientists began linking synthetic dyes to hyperactivity and chemical toxicity, the glow lost its innocence. The Food and Drug Administration stepped in, and the so-called radioactive brights vanished almost overnight. Natural colors returned, but the visual magic disappeared. The duller tones felt safer, but also strangely sad, like the lights had dimmed in the nation's pantry. For the first time, Americans began questioning the idea of perfection on their plates. Beauty, it seemed, could be dangerous. Pickles that once glistened with impossible vibrance now sat honest and humble in their jars, pale but pure. It was the beginning of a quiet reckoning with artifice itself. The fluorescent kitchen lost its shine, and the age of artificial confidence gave way to something plainer. Truth in a jar, even if it looked a little less appetizing. Tinned pineapple. If you've ever watched a raccoon tip over your garbage cans, you might find it hard to imagine inviting one to dinner. Yet, during the Great Depression, resourceful cooks did exactly that, preparing raccoon meat as routinely as chicken. Back then, hunting or trapping raccoons wasn't just a hobby, it was survival. Cookbooks advised carefully cleaning and soaking the meat overnight, typically in vinegar or salt water, to remove the greasy, gamey flavor before roasting it with sweet potatoes or simmering it into a hearty stew. Interestingly, raccoon was even featured prominently in community cook-offs and rural Sunday dinners, considered delicious enough to appear in popular recipes alongside pork and beef. However, the days of openly dining on raccoon meat faded with tightening health and wildlife regulations. Today, consuming raccoons is strongly discouraged or explicitly illegal in many states due to serious concerns about rabies and parasites. Wildlife agencies emphasize that raccoons, those nocturnal bandits once invited to dinner, carry diseases that cooking doesn't always eliminate. Now, you've heard of lots of kinds of different sandwiches, but a bean sandwich might be new even for us. What does it typically consist of? Well, you basically treat the beans as a spread here. The cooked beans often get mashed, and then they're mixed with seasonings and herbs to add a bit of an aromatic kick to them. Typically, people were using regional beans that were really easy to get. You know as well as I do that convenience runs in the blood of every American, my friend. Pinto beans, navy beans, and kidney beans were some of the most accessible kinds of beans around and were the easiest to get. Lots of hardship economically meant that people had no option but to rely on things like these for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, but particularly breakfast. With lunch and dinner, you could still run a soup or some kind of stew and get away with it. But what did people do for breakfast? Butter and toast? Couldn't have worked. You were saving that bread for more filling options, and butter was expensive. Things like bean sandwiches were really helpful because they were a reliable go-to. Divinity cake took its name from the heavenly candy that inspired its frosting, a confection so temperamental that Southern bakers joked it required divine intervention to succeed. The cake layers were typically white or yellow butter cake, simple and sturdy enough to support the elaborate frosting that made this dessert famous. Divinity frosting was made by cooking sugar syrup to precise temperature, then beating it into stiff egg whites until it transformed into billowy, cloud-like peaks. The frosting was impossibly light, yet held its shape, tasting of pure sweetness with a texture that dissolved on the tongue. Humidity was the enemy, and experienced bakers refused to attempt divinity on rainy days. The finished cake looked like it was topped with fresh snowdrifts, making it a natural choice for Christmas tables. Pecans were often pressed into the frosting, adding crunch and earthiness to the sweet pie with simplicity perfected, nothing but eggs, milk, sugar, and vanilla baked into silky smoothness that melted on the tongue with every bite. The filling required no cooking on the stovetop, just whisking ingredients together and pouring them into an unbaked crust carefully. As the pie baked low and slow, the custard set from the edges inward, developing a golden top dusted with nutmeg that filled the kitchen with comforting warmth. The ingredients cost mere pennies: eggs from backyard chickens, milk from the dairy, sugar and vanilla from the pantry shelf. Yet the result tasted elegant, the kind of dessert that proved skill mattered more than expensive. Uninspected venison jerky was once a road trip snack and hunter's pride. Small towns and roadside stands sold it by the bag, made from deer hunted just a few miles away. But the 1950s ushered in a new era of federal oversight. The United States Department of Agriculture began cracking down on uninspected meats, demanding licenses and safety checks even for small operations. Hunters and local butchers cried foul, calling it an attack on tradition. Officials called it modernization. The truth lay somewhere in between. The ban on uninspected jerky was not just about hygiene, it was about control. Homemade dried meat, once a symbol of independence, was now considered illegal unless approved by the government. It marked the moment when food stopped being purely local and became part of a national system of trust or suspicion. Reality reached extremes during the Great Depression, prompting homemakers to become amateur meat inspectors, carefully sniffing, trimming, and salvaging moldy or spoiled meat, hoping tonight's dinner wouldn't become tomorrow's medical emergency. While modern sensibilities cringe at the thought, families in dire poverty routinely carved away discolored portions, heavily seasoned questionable cuts, then cooked them at high temperatures to minimize risk, though the flavor sometimes left diners longing for less adventurous meals. Depression-era recipe books quietly hinted that spoiled meat could be resurrected by lengthy boiling or vinegar marinades, presumably on the theory that vinegar masked more sins than it absolved. Surprisingly, this wasn't entirely misguided. Boiling could neutralize some bacteria, though it did little to eliminate dangerous toxins already present. Eventually, as understanding of foodborne illnesses grew, health officials recognized consuming spoiled or moldy meat wasn't a test of toughness, but a genuine public health threat. Strict federal food safety regulations emerged, explicitly forbidding restaurants and stores from selling spoiled products and making it illegal to knowingly distribute unsafe meat. Stew isn't something you'd see anywhere today, but it was the talk of the town back in the 1930s. Watermelons, including the rind, are actually pretty wasted. People almost always throw away the rind, and very few actually try to do anything with it. Back in the 1930s, even the rind was used. The green skin on the exterior of the watermelon was something people peeled away, but they'd usually save it to make jelly or something out of it. The rind was also cut into cubes, strips, and whatever else people could find use for. The rind was then cooked and boiled until it was soft enough to be eaten, and it was also salted so that any excessive bitterness could be controlled. Once people did make the rind, they'd add it to the base of a stew that was made from some pretty hands-on ingredients, basically whatever people had lying around. The biggest reason people wanted to use the rind was because it was really high in water content. It could soak up any kind of seasonings because date nut cake was a dense, moist confection that showcased two ingredients beloved by mid-century bakers for their natural sweetness and satisfying texture. Dates were chopped and often soaked in hot water or coffee to plump them before being folded into the batter along with generous amounts of walnuts or pecans. The resulting cake was more like a sweet bread than a traditional layer cake, dense enough to slice thin and substantial enough to satisfy without frosting. Some recipes called for a simple glaze or a cream cheese frosting, but many bakers left the cake plain, letting the concentrated sweetness of the dates speak for itself. The cake improved with age, the flavors melding and deepening over several days of storage. Date nut dump cake earned its name from the effortless method, literally dumping ingredients into a pan and letting the oven do all the work. A can of fruit pie filling spread across the bottom, topped with dry cake mix straight from the box, then dotted with butter. As it baked, the butter melted through the cake mix, creating a cobbler-like topping over bubbling fruit. The whole thing cost less than $1 and required no mixing bowls, measuring cups, or baking expertise whatsoever. Cherry pie filling with white cake mix became a Christmas classic, its red and white layers looking almost deliberately festive. Families short on time or energy found dump cake a lifesaver during the hectic holiday season. Home-cured bacon was once the pride of farmhouse kitchens, salted, hung, and smoked with care. Families passed down curing recipes like heirlooms, believing that a bit of salt and thyme could preserve more than just meat. It could preserve self-sufficiency. But in the 1950s, science stepped in with a warning. Nitrates, long used in curing, might not be as harmless as they seemed. Studies found they could turn into carcinogenic compounds when heated, sparking one of the earliest food safety scares of the modern age. The government began regulating their use, and homemade bacon suddenly fell under suspicion. People were told to buy factory-sealed packages instead, stamped with federal approval and safety codes. For rural households, it felt like losing a piece of freedom. The smoky scent of bacon in the smokehouse became a relic, replaced by the sterile shine of refrigerated aisles. Once a symbol of self-reliance, home curing was now a risk too great to take. Shellfish cocktail. In the leanest years of the Great Depression, nothing edible went to waste. Not even the parts most people today wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole, like boiled squirrel heads. This peculiar dish, particularly favored in southern Appalachia, involved simmering squirrel heads slowly, extracting tender meat from cheeks and even brains, both prized as delicacies rich in nutrients. Preparation required patience, typically slow-boiled with salt, onions, and herbs until the meat easily slipped off the bone, a culinary adventure often joked about as the original head-to-tail eating philosophy. Eating squirrel heads wasn't merely a quirky rural curiosity, but a necessity-driven culinary solution. During times when meat was scarce, Discarding any edible part was economically unthinkable. However, modern regulations strongly discourage consuming squirrel brains, not merely because it's unsettling dinner table conversation, but due to legitimate health concerns. Studies revealed a disturbing connection between squirrel brain consumption and a rare fatal neurological disorder known as Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, a cousin of the infamous mad cow disease. The popular thing to get around the time for breakfast was rye bread with lard spread. Now, lard spread was a pretty good way of using any kind of lard you had. Rye bread was also a pretty economical choice to go for because the average white bread was a little too expensive. Brown bread or rye bread were the kinds of options people were going for when they did their grocery shopping trips. Also, people who lived further away from places that were selling basic essentials and groceries also focused on rye bread for the fact that it would last longer. Little things like this really added up and made a difference in how people approached their shopping. One of the best uses of lard, outside of just using the fat for cooking, was to make a spread out of it. You might be thinking if that could really be so good. Prune cake was once a beloved Christmas tradition that has fallen victim to unfair modern prejudices against this misunderstood dried fruit. The prunes were stewed until tender, then pureed and folded into a spiced batter that produced one of the moistest cakes imaginable. Cinnamon, nutmeg, allspice, and cloves perfumed the cake with the warm scent of the holiday season. The prunes gave the cake a deep, complex sweetness that was richer than sugar alone could provide, along with a dense, satisfying texture. Buttermilk caramel frosting was the traditional pairing, its burnt sugar notes echoing the caramelized flavors of the dried fruit. Grandmothers who grew up during the Depression knew prunes as nutritious, affordable, and delicious, not something to be embarrassed about. The cakes kept beautifully for days, actually improving as the cookies spread their spicy fragrance through 1950s kitchens during the weeks leading up to Christmas, made from ingredients that cost almost nothing. Molasses was far cheaper than refined sugar and gave cookies a deep, complex sweetness that plain sugar could never match. The dough combined molasses with flour, lard or shortening, ginger, cinnamon, and a touch of baking soda. Fugu, the delicate Japanese pufferfish, had fascinated Americans since stories of its deadly potential reached their shores. The dish was exotic, forbidden, and thrilling, but in the 1950s, the government decided it was one risk too many. The toxin in fugu could stop a heart in minutes, and one wrong cut from a chef's knife meant disaster. The ban was absolute. Restaurants caught serving it faced heavy fines, and imports were confiscated before reaching ports. To the adventurous, it became a symbol of lost courage, a delicacy wrapped in danger that America simply could not trust. Yet its legend only grew. In post-war magazines, fugu was spoken of like a ghost of the East, deadly, beautiful, and untouchable. The ban was not just about safety, it was about fear of the unfamiliar. In trying to protect itself, America also closed its door to one of the world's most daring cuisines. Trans fats were unfortunately not just prevalent in margarine production, but many other foods like fried roll pulls as well, which meant that culling the problem all across the American nation may be more challenging than the government initially thought. Basically, if something had liquid oil becoming solid fat, it had trans fats, and that means it had a health risk worth considering. Fried roll-ups happened to be a delicious snack that many people would enjoy in their free time or when they found a stall with the fragrance of a good roll-up. Although businesses like that would suffer the same as margarine producers did when the FDA put a lid on the entire situation with trans fats, and we cannot be happier that they did. Look, it is not like we do not enjoy our fair share of fried food, but the fried roll-up pulls just had too many trans fats for something that was available readily and fast. The smoky aroma of grilled meat has been a staple of backyard cookouts for generations. But in the 1960s, few people realized that along with the rich, charred flavor came an unwanted ingredient. If you think about scrapple cakes, then you can pretty much think of them as a kind of meat pudding. It's actually fitting that we end on a foreign dish because it's exactly during the Depression that people first learned to appreciate all the different communities, cultures, and traditions that thrive within America. Specifically in Scrapple is typically made from minced offal and pork meat, and it's mixed with different kinds of spices and cornmeal. People also tend to add buckwheat and pork bow to make a healing and rich broth. People used to go around calling this the poor man's bacon, but I guess life has a funny way of humbling everybody, doesn't it? Those same people found themselves swearing by coconut cake reigned supreme as the most requested Christmas dessert across the American South, its snowy white layers and generous coating of fresh coconut making it look like winter itself. The cake required cracking and shredding fresh coconuts by hand, a task producing incomparably sweet, moist shreds, nothing like the dried packaged variety. 3 or 4 tender white layers were stacked with cooked 7-minute frosting that billowed like clouds, then covered completely with fresh coconut. The coconut had to be applied while frosting was still tacky, pressed gently into every surface until the cake resembled a snowball. Some bakers poked holes in layers and drizzled fresh coconut milk over them for extra moisture. The finished cake was displayed on the most elegant cake stand the household owned, often on a silver pedestal reserved only for Christmas. Children would sneak pinches of sweet tapioca pudding, turn tiny pearls into creamy comfort that satisfied sweet cravings at minimal cost during the holiday season. Pearl tapioca simmered in milk until the spheres became transformed stale loaves into Christmas comfort, turning what would have been waste into one of the most beloved desserts of the era. Thrifty housewives saved bread heels and dried slices throughout the week, knowing Sunday's pudding depended on their frugality. The bread was torn into pieces, soaked in a custard of eggs, milk, sugar, and vanilla, then baked until golden and puffed. Raisins or dried fruit added sweetness when available, while cinnamon and nutmeg made the kitchen smell like the holidays. The custard transformed dry bread into something almost magical, creamy in the center with crispy edges that everyone fought over. A simple sauce of butter, sugar, and vanilla, or whiskey for the adults, turned humble ingredients into celebration. Bread pudding cost nearly nothing yet delivered warmth and satisfaction that expensive desserts could not match. It taught children that nothing should ever go to waste. Irradiated fruit was supposed to be the future. Government scientists promised longer shelf lives, fewer pests, and fresher produce for all. They beamed atomic rays through oranges and apples, calling it the miracle of modern preservation. But when newspapers began calling it nuclear food, the optimism curdled. The same technology that powered bombs was now being used on breakfast tables, and that frightened everyone. Housewives wrote letters to Congress demanding answers. Schools began banning irradiated fruit from cafeterias, and grocery stores quietly cleared their shelves. No matter how many officials said it was safe, people could not shake the image of glowing fruit sitting under the kitchen light. By the end of the decade, the program was halted completely. The fear was stronger than the science, and the atomic age of food ended before it ever truly began. In a period marked by rapid industrialization and cost-cutting innovations, one controversial ingredient left its mark on the processed meat industry: canned pink slime meat. Emerging as a byproduct of the 1960s surge in mass-produced foods, this product was initially celebrated for its efficiency and affordability, which resonated with a public eager for convenience amid economic uncertainties. At a time when regulatory oversight was still developing, its inclusion in everyday meals proceeded with minimal scrutiny, a situation that would later prompt significant policy revisions. Although it provided an economical solution for meat processors, consumers soon discovered that the product harbored potential health risks, ranging from digestive disturbances to concerns over long-term exposure to industrial chemicals. Advertisements touted its value as an innovative way to extend meat supplies, a claim that seemed almost too good to be true once adverse health impacts came to light. As the scientific community began to unravel the full implications of ingesting such additives, regulatory agencies tightened standards and its usage was eventually curtailed in many applications. So the thing with baked onions is that they were really good, and they were definitely a perfect way to warm yourself up in the winter, but they were also very restricted. By that I mean that if you didn't have an oven, you could simply forget about using your onions this way. The best part about this is that it meant you could actually make do with 1 or 2 onions, instead of using more than that, so it also let you stretch your pantry out just a bit more. However, again, this was something you would only see in urban hubs in big cities. Go over to Detroit or California, where people had pretty much bought ovens before the Depression had hit, and yeah, sure, you would find neighbors sharing baked onions and cooking something, but if you went to the other side of America, you would get a different picture. This is also a part of why families decided to migrate and live with their relatives in cities. They simply had more to work. Coconut cake reigned supreme as the most requested Christmas dessert across the American South, its snowy white layers and generous coating of fresh coconut making it look like winter itself. The cake required cracking and shredding fresh coconuts by hand, a task producing incomparably sweet, moist shreds, nothing like the dried packaged variety. 3 or 4 tender white layers were stacked with cooked 7-minute frosting that billowed like clouds, then covered completely with fresh coconut. The coconut had to be applied. Gingerbread filled 1950s homes with the scent of Christmas itself, its spicy warmth announcing the holidays had truly arrived at last. Molasses gave the batter its deep mahogany color and complex sweetness, while ginger, cinnamon, and cloves provided the signature warmth that tingled on the tongue. The cake baked into something dense and moist, almost sticky, that improved over several days as the flavors deepened and melded together. Served warm with whipped cream or tangy lemon sauce, it became dessert, but many families ate it plain for breakfast during the holiday weeks. Molasses cost far less than refined sugar and delivered far more interesting flavor, making gingerbread an economical choice for families stretching their tea was once America's forest tonic, brewed from the roots of trees and steeped in stories of old-time healing. Families drank it for colds, stomach aches, or simply for comfort on long winter nights. Then came the 1950s, and with it, science that declared sassafras unsafe. Tests found that saffrole, its key oil, could cause liver damage and cancer in lab animals. Almost overnight, it went from folk remedy to forbidden drink. The government banned it, and families poured out bottles they had once cherished. To some, it felt like losing a piece of tradition, like watching folklore itself get outlawed. But behind the fear was a real truth. Not everything natural is safe. The ban marked one of the first times modern science overruled old wisdom in American kitchens. Even today, the scent of sassafras carries both nostalgia and caution, a reminder that comfort and danger sometimes come from the same cup. By the 1960s, soda had become more than just a refreshing treat. It was a cultural icon. With its bold flavors, flashy advertisements, and promises of instant energy, it was a staple of American life. But some brands took that last promise a little too far. High-caffeine soda wasn't just about a quick pick-me-up. Some of these carbonated concoctions packed as much caffeine as several cups of coffee in a single bottle. At a time when regulations were still catching up to the booming food and beverage industry, caffeine content wasn't something most consumers thought to question. For those needing an extra boost, whether for a long shift, a late-night study session, or just to keep up with the fast pace of modern life, these sodas were a tempting choice. But what went down easy didn't always sit well. Excessive caffeine consumption could lead to heart palpitations, anxiety, and even dependency. Some drinkers learned the hard way that too much of a good thing wasn't always a good thing. As research into caffeine's effects grew, regulations tightened. Today, sodas still contain caffeine, but the extreme levels once found in certain brands have been curbed. Have you ever heard about coffee soup? Sounds like a fever dream, right? Yet that's exactly what it is. A soup made with coffee. As offensive to your familiar taste buds as that sounds, hear me out. You take some coffee, scraps of bread, and sometimes mineral or brown sugar and milk, and then you'd brew the coffee. Then you'd mix in those pieces of bread in the hot coffee and add whatever sweeteners and spices you had, and that was pretty much that. They call it a soup, but in practice it's more like coffee with extra steps, really. Still, it was a far better use of your cup of joe than just drinking it plainly. This way, you could get carbs in the form of bread, some much-needed glucose from sugar to help keep your brain running. You got your daily hit of caffeine, and the spices would help keep you active. People didn't look at food the same way we did back then, which is why some of these dishes might seem really outlandish to you. We look at food and think about pleasure, fulfillment, and what suits our tastes. White fruitcake offered a refined alternative to the dense, dark fruitcakes dominating many holiday tables during the 1950s. Made without molasses or dark spices, this elegant version featured golden cake batter studded with candied pineapple, pale golden raisins, blanched almonds, and light-colored candied cherries. The result sparkled like winter snow when sliced, its jewel-toned fruits visible against pale crumb. Bakers soaked dried Prune Whip transformed the humble dried plum into an elegant mousse-like dessert that cost almost nothing to prepare. Stewed prunes were pureed and folded into beaten egg whites, creating a light, airy confection that seemed far more sophisticated than its ingredients suggested. The natural sweetness of the prunes meant little added sugar was needed, making it economical and relatively healthy. Chilled until set, the whip held its shape beautifully when spooned into dessert dishes. A dollop of whipped cream on top elevated the presentation from everyday to company-worthy. Prunes were among the cheapest dried fruits available, often purchased in bulk at significant savings. The stew was not born from luxury, it was born from survival. During wartime shortages, when beef and pork were rationed beyond reach, horse meat quietly took their place on American dinner tables. It was cheap, tender, and easy to find in butcher shops trying to meet impossible demands. But by the 1950s, eating horse meat became unthinkable. The very animal that carried soldiers, pulled plows, and symbolized American endurance had turned into a taboo. Cultural backlash spread through headlines and households alike. Eating a horse was now seen as an act of desperation, not resourcefulness. The meat was pulled from shelves, restaurants scrubbed it from menus, and butchers who sold it were shamed. It was one of the first examples of food politics shaped not by safety or health, but by emotion and morality. The stew that once fed hungry families during hard times suddenly vanished, erased by changing values. In the end, the horse went back to the stable, this time as something sacred. Color dye. During the Great Depression, when pantry shelves often looked emptier than politicians' promises, resourceful cooks headed into the woods, turning nature's mystery produce into dinner. Unregulated foraged mushrooms became commonplace, not from gourmet preference, but simple necessity. Families plucked mushrooms indiscriminately, often without knowing a morel from a death cap, and tossed them confidently into stews or skillets, sautéing them with butter or bacon fat. Old cookbooks optimistically advised, "When in doubt, boil twice," a questionable method that unfortunately didn't neutralize deadly toxins. Despite countless accidental poisonings, mushroom foraging surged in popularity, with amateur gatherers picking anything remotely edible-looking, sometimes proving that bravery and culinary wisdom don't always go hand in hand. By the mid-20th century, authorities took action, heavily restricting mushroom foraging in public parks and forests. Today, selling wild foraged mushrooms without certification is outright illegal in many states, enforced through strict permitting systems intended to protect public health. Imagine rummaging through a pantry full of unlabeled jars, playing culinary roulette with tonight's dinner. Exactly what many Vinegar pie is something that's been around for a while, but it was also a dish that really saw a sky-high increase in public affection throughout the Depression. Remember how I was just talking about the way people really didn't get any kind of sweets during the Depression? It was rough. I meant that people never ever got things for celebrations. Many birthdays were spent without cakes, many holidays were spent without any decorations or sweets, and whenever people had a sugar craving or just genuinely did need sugar, not even as a craving like their body literally needed it, they could never access it. Vinegar pie, on the other hand, was tangy, but also sweet. It was a unique dessert that teetered on the edge of being a proper sweet while still being affordable and simple enough that just about anyone could make it without worrying. Vinegar pie goes all the way back to the early 19th century, but it resurfaced right around the 1930s as a part of mock food culture. People wanted to mimic the way lemon pie tasted, and I honestly think they got pretty close. Would you ever try giving this sugar cake carried a bittersweet sophistication that set it apart from other holiday desserts on 1950s tables? The caramelized sugar syrup flavoring both cake and frosting required patience, as sugar had to be cooked until almost black before being carefully diluted with hot water. This gave the cake its distinctive amber color and deep, complex flavor-balancing sweetness with an almost smoky undertone. Home bakers prized their burnt sugar skills, knowing the difference between perfect caramel and ruin was mere seconds. The frosting was equally challenging, a cooked caramel icing beaten at exactly the right temperature for smooth consistency. Served on cut glass cake stands, burnt sugar kolache were those Czech pastries that appeared in bakeries and home kitchens during the Christmas season, their soft, yeasted dough holding pools of fruit filling or sweetened farmer cheese. The dough was rich with butter and eggs, rolled into small rounds and pressed in the center to create wells for the filling. Traditional fillings included prune, poppy seed, apricot, and a sweetened cheese mixture that was almost home-canned. Tomatoes and beans were once a homemaker's pride, a shelf lined with jars that meant security through winter. But by the 1950s, those same jars came with warning labels. Botulism outbreaks traced back to kitchen canning terrified families who had relied on the tradition for generations. Health departments launched campaigns against home preservation, urging people to buy store-bought cans instead. It marked the end of a domestic ritual, traded for factory efficiency. Women who once measured their worth by their pantries now felt shame or fear over what might be lurking in their jars. It was not just a public health issue. It was a cultural shift. The kitchen, once the safest room in the house, suddenly seemed like a place where danger could grow unseen. The government called it progress. Homemakers called it a loss. Either way, a century-old skill quietly faded into memory, replaced by the metallic comfort of tin cans. Preserving meat was crucial when refrigeration wasn't an option, so Depression-era families turned to unpasteurized home-canned meats, a kitchen practice that involved cooking meat cuts, placing them in reused glass jars, then sealing tightly with wax or rudimentary lids. Housewives proudly displayed pantry shelves stocked with jars filled with pork, beef, or chicken, simmered simply in their own juices, offering a reliable meal source during the harshest months. Although economical, this preservation method was essentially playing culinary roulette. Without pressure cookers, botulism thrived unseen, sometimes delivering more than families bargained for at dinner. After all, homemade pickles were tasty, paralysis not so much. In fact, botulism outbreaks from improperly canned meats contributed significantly to the establishment of strict federal regulations mandating pressure canning and pasteurization to safeguard consumers. By mid-century, labels, expiration dates, and government oversight replaced wax seals and guesswork, legally forbidding unpasteurized home-canned meats from commercial sale and strongly discouraging them domestically. Beet greens with vinegar show a lot of the lifestyle choices that people were making and gravitating towards during the Depression. Simple things, filling meals, dishes that had a lot more health benefits than fancy tastes or European twists. Families were really struggling to afford just about anything meat-related, so they clutched the vegetables that were similar to it, whether that was in texture or taste, as closely as they could to their chests. They'd take beet greens from a bunch of beets and a tablespoon of vinegar. Then, some bacon grease or vegetable oil would work. If you were using fresh greens, then you would usually trim the stems and leaves. But people would even save these because you could use the leaves to sew holes in clothes or the stems for medicinal treatments. The best part about this dish was again that you could pretty much just make it over an open fire. It was a bit tricky to make because the greens were really prone to wilting as they cooked, which is naturally what happens, so people really reached out to their neighbors for once with help in how to perfect the recipe and technique. Lots of people relied on vinegar as an addition in a lot of their dishes because it helped a lot, whether it was in adding some tang and contrast to the dishes. You could also serve this dish with some beans. Japanese fruitcake was once the crown jewel of Southern Christmas tables, a towering confection that had nothing to do with Japan, but everything to do with American ingenuity. The name likely came from the exotic spices that reminded bakers of faraway lands. Each layer was different, one spiced with cinnamon and cloves and studded with raisins, another plain white for contrast. The filling was legendary, a cooked mixture of fresh coconut, pecans, and citrus that took hours to prepare. Grandmothers started baking weeks before Christmas, knowing flavors needed time to meld. The coconut filling spread thick between layers created a cake that was moist, complex, and unforgettable. Families guarded their recipes fiercely. Each one's slice balls were the edible decorations that doubled as desserts, hanging from Christmas trees before being devoured by eager children. Popped corn was mixed with a hot syrup of sugar, corn syrup, and butter that bound the kernels together into sticky, sweet spheres. Working quickly while the syrup was still pliable, mothers shaped balls with buttered handmade sweeteners promised guilt-free sweetness long before diet culture had a name. Housewives sprinkled it into coffee, dieters swore by it, and soda companies celebrated it as the taste of the future. But when lab tests linked cyclamates to cancer in rats, the panic spread faster than the rumors themselves. By the late 1950s, government regulators stepped in, pulling the sweetener from shelves in a sudden sweep that shocked the public. For millions, it was the first time they realized their pantry could be hiding a threat. What was once a symbol of modern convenience became a warning about how far science could go in the name of progress. The ban exposed a growing divide between trust in innovation and fear of what it might cost. The taste of safety turned bitter, and Americans began to question every miracle ingredient that followed. Cyclamate sweeteners faded, but their shadow lingered over every sugar substitute that came after, from saccharin to aspartame. The country learned that even sweetness had consequences. Horse meat's very last item on our list is candy cigarettes, which you should not mix up with candy-flavored cigarettes. These were actual candies that were shaped like cigarettes and made out of sugar, chocolate, and bubble gum wrapped in edible paper. They had powdered sugar lacing the wrapper too, which made it possible for the user to puff a cloud out, but instead of smoke, it would be sugar. The entire product was meant to imitate the experience of a smoke and hopefully work as a crutch to help people quit, but it only had the opposite effect. Many critics thought it was making children numb to cigarettes, increasing their curiosity in the substance, and causing those who already have smokers in the home to be more likely to try it. There was a lot of controversy surrounding these candies, and it did not help that they were marketed so similar to cigarette brands. All in all, not a good look for a product aimed at kids. Eventually, they were banned as part of the efforts to eradicate smoking. And we gotta say, there are a few things in history America has been as thorough about weeding out as its brief fling with smoking. Usually made with water or milk, and is a type of pudding or porridge depending on the needs of the meal. This became incredibly widespread in the southeastern and eastern bits of America, and it makes sense given how much wartime rations were consumed there. When the government would hand those out, they would often make a point to lower sugar usage and use molasses to conserve other ingredients, so people would pair cornmeal mush along with them. Mush is a more accurate term since it does kind of land somewhere in the middle ground between a pudding and a porridge. It has the consistency of the latter, but it gels and sets like the former, which gives it a slightly airy texture too. Did you know it would not be cooked in milk though? That was set after the mush was prepared to cool it down. When you think of popcorn, the Dust Bowl era is probably the last thing that comes to mind. Popcorn is the comfort food of the movie theaters, but believe it or not, they were still all the rage back in the 30s when options were limited. During the Dust Bowl, these crunchy snacks took on a whole new role. Yes, they paired popcorn with milk back then, and it became the combo of our dreams. When milk was available, it was poured over freshly popped popcorn to turn the snack into a whole meal. Milk was scarce, so it wasn't always available, but when it was, this meal was everyone's go-to. Popcorn was a cheap and easily accessible grain, and milk, if you were lucky enough to have some, added a bit of dog cake, captured the essence of the beloved Christmas beverage in solid form, bringing holiday cheer to every slice. The batter incorporated actual eggnog, adding richness, nutmeg flavor, and a tender crumb that regular milk could never achieve. Some recipes called for bourbon or rum to echo traditional spiked eggnog, while others let the dairy and spice speak for themselves. The cake was typically a bundt or tube cake, golden and fragrant with the warm scent of nutmeg and vanilla. A glaze made from powdered sugar, eggnog, and sometimes a splash of spirits dripped down the fluted sides, pooling in the crevices and adding sweetness. The cake tasted like Christmas itself, all cream and spice and warmth. Bakers made it only during the brief window when commercial eggnog was available, though some ambitious cooks made their own from scratch. Turned leftover rice into creamy Christmas comfort that satisfied both children and adults with its gentle sweetness. Cooked rice was combined with milk, sugar, eggs, and vanilla, then baked slowly until the custard set and a golden skin formed on top. Raisins plumped in the warm mixture, becoming soft bursts of sweetness in every spoonful. The pudding could be served warm from the oven or chilled overnight, becoming even creamier as it rested. Cinnamon or nutmeg dusted on top added holiday fragrance without adding cost. Families who always had rice in the pantry found this dessert endlessly adaptable, using whatever milk was available and adjusting sweetness to taste. The slow baking filled homes with warmth during cold December evenings. Rice pudding proved that the simplest ingredients, treated with patience and when food was scarce and nothing could be wasted, even discarded bones found their way into soup pots, leading to a common Depression-era practice: boiling wild animal bones for broth without proper cleaning. Families scavenged whatever bones they could find, from hunted game to roadkill, tossing them directly into bubbling water to extract every ounce of nutrition. Long-simmered broths were the foundation of countless meals, stretching meager ingredients into something filling, even if the origins of the bones remained a little too mysterious. However, without modern sanitation practices, these broths often carried more than just flavor. Bacteria, parasites, and even traces of decomposing tissue lurked in improperly cleaned bones, turning survival soup into an unintended health hazard. Despite folk wisdom insisting that boiling kills everything, science eventually proved otherwise. As food safety regulations evolved, health officials cracked down on uninspected animal byproducts, requiring commercial food production to follow strict sanitation guidelines. Today, using uncleaned wild bones for broth is a serious violation of food safety laws, largely banned in restaurants and commercial kitchens due to contamination risks. Black-eyed pea fritters were actually something people almost always associated with New Year's. It was something that was synonymous in the South back then with New Year's Eve celebrations, especially during the 1930s. If you go explore any kind of African American or Southern culture, then you'll find that this is a timeless dish. Black-eyed peas in and of themselves aren't something you can separate from the culture at all, but this recipe also reflects how they can be adapted for hard times. Black-eyed pea fritters were a really creative way to use some cheap ingredients. People would also sometimes add in stuff like meat and leftover bacon and sausages if they could spare it. Any kind of greens they were growing or any scraps of spinach they had would also work. Maybe the nicest part of this dish is the way you could repurpose leftovers or stretch meals to make them more heavy, or how you could use them to ration things out so they'd last even more. You could buy them in bulk too, so that meant you could get a bit of a discount at the local grocery shops. Scripture cake was a beloved Christmas tradition that turned baking into a biblical treasure hunt, with each ingredient referenced by chapter and verse. Recipes listed items like Judges 5:25 for butter and Jeremiah 6:20 for sugar, requiring bakers to look up each passage in their family Bible. The result was typically a rich spice cake studded with figs, raisins, almonds, and honey, flavors evoking the ancient Holy Land. Sunday school classes and church groups baked scripture cakes together as holiday activities, combining religious education with kitchen skills. Mothers used the recipe to teach children both cooking techniques and biblical literacy in a single afternoon. The cakes were dense and aromatic, filled with warming spices of cinnamon, nutmeg, and cloves that filled kitchens with the smell of Christmas. Though the tradition has faded, Scripture cake once represented how faith and food intertwined in American celebrations. Vinegar pie mystified anyone who heard its name, yet those who tasted it discovered something remarkably close to lemon pie without the expensive citrus. The filling combined sugar, flour, eggs, butter, and plain white vinegar, creating a custard that was tangy, sweet, and surprisingly sophisticated. During the 1950s, when fresh lemons were seasonal luxuries, vinegar pie kept holiday tables bright with that essential tartness. The pie baked until the filling set and the top turned slightly golden, filling the kitchen with a caramelized sweetness that masked any hint of its humble origins. Some families topped it with meringue, stretching egg whites into billowy clouds that made the pie look far more expensive than its few cents worth of ingredients. Children never knew they were eating a substitute, they just knew they loved it. Vinegar pie represented the quiet genius of making do beautifully. Rice pudding food with lead-soldered lids was a quiet tragedy. For years, parents trusted those neat little jars filled with mashed peas and carrots, believing them to be the safest meals a child could eat. Then scientists discovered that the solder sealing the cans leached lead into the food. Exposure built up slowly, harming development and cognition. The public outcry was swift and devastating. Manufacturers were forced to recall entire product lines, and new regulations banned lead in all food packaging. It was one of the earliest lessons in how industrial shortcuts could endanger the most innocent consumers. Parents who once felt pride in modern convenience now felt guilt every time they opened a jar. The reform saved lives, but it also shattered trust. The gleaming promise of post-war food technology, sorghum cake drew its distinctive character from the thick, dark syrup that once sweetened tables across the rural South and Midwest. Before refined sugar became affordable, sorghum molasses was the sweetener of choice, produced by pressing juice from sorghum cane and cooking it down to syrupy thickness. The resulting cakes had deep, complex sweetness with notes of caramel, smoke, and something almost metallic that refined sugar could never provide. Spices like ginger, cinnamon, and cloves were essential partners, their warmth balancing sorghum's intensity. The batter was often made with buttermilk, which reacted with acidic sorghum to create tender crumb. Farm families When Depression-era parents faced exhausted patients and empty pantries, unconventional parenting methods occasionally emerged, including feeding children coffee or liquor to help them sleep. Surprisingly common at the time, this alarming practice stemmed not from malicious intent, but desperate necessity. Families believed small doses of alcohol or diluted coffee soothed hungry or restless children. Typically, mothers mixed coffee heavily diluted with milk, sugar, or even a splash of whiskey to calm crying infants and restless toddlers. Pediatricians of the era often overlooked or humorously downplayed the potential harm, advising anxious parents that a teaspoon of whiskey was just good old-fashioned medicine, not realizing these nightcaps might actually stunt growth or harm young developing brains. Eventually, society and science caught up with common sense, leading lawmakers and child welfare agencies to explicitly classify giving children alcohol as illegal child abuse. Today, state laws universally forbid giving alcohol or caffeine to infants and toddlers, recognizing clear dangers ranging from sleep disturbances to severe developmental damage. Wheat germ muffins, on the other hand, were something that mostly saw a lot of use during the Depression, never before or after that. It makes sense because if you put it in the context of the Depression, this thing has an edge over most recipes. It's got minerals and vitamins. It's packed with a lot of energy, and it even helps you stay full longer. Outside of the Depression, you could fill up entire Pinterest boards with the amount of foods that do that while also tasting a lot better. Wheat germ muffins were a recipe that could also be adapted into several different variations too, which meant that most people could put their own spin on it according to their regional tastes. For example, in the South, people really prefer dried fruits, so that was the go-to addition there. In the North, people liked fruits and warm spices more, so stuff like cinnamon and nutmeg was heavily used. Recipes from the 1930s around wheat germ muffins are built in a way that utilizes every single ingredient. As far as the muffins themselves go, they're actually delectably soft and very fluffy. Not at all what you would expect out of a bare-bones recipe. Pickled peaches were jeweled accompaniments that appeared beside Christmas hams, their spiced sweetness providing perfect counterpoint to rich meats. Canned peach halves were simmered in syrup infused with whole cloves, cinnamon sticks, and apple cider vinegar until they absorbed warm spices completely. The peaches emerged tender and glossy, their golden flesh tinged with amber from the spiced brine. Packed into jars, they could be preserved for months, ready to grace holiday tables whenever needed. Each peach half was studded with whole cloves, making them look almost decorative, edible ornaments for the dinner plate. The flavor was complex, simultaneously sweet, tart, and warmly spiced in ways that elevated simple sliced ham. Grandmothers often made these in late summer when fresh peaches were cheap, though canned versions worked nearly as well. Pickled peaches represented the tradition of putting up preserves, ensuring summer's sweetness could brighten even the darkest winter meals. Sweet pudding. Apple Brown Betty layered sliced apples with buttered breadcrumbs and brown sugar into a dessert that cost almost nothing, yet tasted deeply satisfying and comforting. Stale bread found new life as crumbs toasted in butter, becoming golden and crispy before being layered with seasoned fruit. Cinnamon and nutmeg perfumed the layers, while lemon juice kept the apples bright and prevented browning. As the Betty baked, the crumbs absorbed the apple juices and the top turned gloriously crunchy while the inside stayed soft and fruity. The dessert required no special pan, no pastry skills, just the willingness to layer ingredients and let the oven work its magic. Families with apple trees made Brown Betty throughout fall and winter, using stored fruit that might otherwise go soft before being eaten. Served warm with fresh cream poured over, it rivaled any fancy pie. Apple Brown Betty represented thrift transformed into genuine deliciousness that families requested again and again. Custard tales from street vendors were the taste of coastal summer. Iced oysters and clams scooped into paper cups and doused with lemon and spice. They were cheap, lively, and social, eaten standing up with friends under the sun. But as hepatitis outbreaks swept through seaside towns, health boards declared war on raw shellfish. Vendors were shut down, and beachside stalls were emptied overnight. Scientists blamed warm weather, poor storage, and lack of regulation. But for locals, it felt like losing a ritual. The ocean's bounty was now something to fear, not savor. People began boiling, frying, and sterilizing what they once ate fresh. Those carefree days of slurping briny cocktails from paper cups were gone, replaced by strict hygiene codes and refrigerated displays. Safety came at the cost of spontaneity. America's love for the sea stayed, but its trust in street-side seafood never recovered. During the hardest years of the Great Depression, desperate hunger led Americans to pursue protein sources that nowadays would make your local health inspector faint, like bat meat. Although bats weren't common dinner fare, isolated accounts from this challenging era document people trapping and roasting these nocturnal creatures, usually out of sheer necessity rather than culinary curiosity. Preparation involved singeing the fur off bats, an image probably best left to history books, and roasting or boiling the meat thoroughly to combat its intensely gamey taste. Some Depression-era home chefs optimistically suggested marinating bat meat overnight, perhaps hoping to mask flavors described politely as unusually pungent. Humorously, no cookbook of the era prominently advertised bat recipes, suggesting even desperate cooks preferred to keep bat suppers under wraps. Today, however, American laws explicitly forbid hunting or consuming bats, recognizing their critical role in ecosystems as insect controllers and pollinators. Additionally, bats carry diseases like rabies and histoplasmosis, making their consumption extremely dangerous and firmly illegal. Hairless applesauce is pretty much an example of Depression-era cooking that gets into the thrifty side of things. I say this because it was really uncommon for people to ever picture making any kind of applesauce without sugar. It started becoming a trend during the Depression because it also helped people preserve their apples, and those were often ones people were growing in their own gardens and orchards at home. People preferred these because, for one, they were free, and two, they also didn't have any sweeteners. Apples already have natural sugar, so why mess with what God made and add some stuff you don't even need, or like that just jacks up the price at any grocery market? Exactly. The thing was, though, that this recipe took a lot of apples, so if you ever had apples that were on the verge of spoiling, then this was a fantastic way to get rid of them. It was practical, it was convenient, and it was actually pretty good and sweet despite what you may think. Waldorf cake was an elegant chocolate layer cake that carried the prestige of its famous New York hotel namesake. The cake featured rich chocolate layers frosted with a cooked chocolate frosting that was smoother and more refined than simple buttercream. Chopped pecans or walnuts were folded into the frosting or pressed onto the sides, adding texture and earthiness to the sophisticated chocolate. Some versions included a red velvet-style coloring, connecting it to that famous cake also associated with the Waldorf Astoria. The frosting required cooking sugar, milk, and chocolate together until thickened, then beating until spreadable, a technique that demanded attention and skill. Waldorf cake represented aspirational baking, a chance for home cooks to create something with big city sophistication. It graced Christmas tables in homes where elegance and tradition mattered equally. The cake's association with New York glamour made it feel special, even in humble kitchens far from Manhattan. Watergate date bars packed dried fruit and oats into chewy squares that traveled well and lasted for weeks, stored in tins without losing their appeal. Chopped dates were cooked with sugar and water until soft and jammy, then spread between layers of buttery oat crumble that turned golden when baked. As the bars emerged from the oven, the oat mixture had become crispy, while the date filling stayed soft and sticky in the center. Each square offered contrasting textures, crunchy exterior giving way to chewy, intensely sweet center that satisfied in small portions. Dates were affordable dried fruit that provided natural sweetness and kept indefinitely in pantries without refrigeration. The bars required no frosting, no decoration, just honest ingredients combined with simple technique and patience. Families made large batches for Christmas cookie exchanges, knowing date bars would stand out among fancier offerings. Date bars represented practical deliciousness that never went out of style through changing decades. Sulfur-treated dried fruit was once advertised as the future of snacking, bright, flavorful, and long-lasting. Housewives could keep apricots, apples, and prunes for months without spoilage. But soon, allergic reactions and asthma attacks began surfacing, especially in children. Doctors traced the problem to the sulfur dioxide used to preserve the fruit's color and shelf life. The Food and Drug Administration moved quickly, tightening restrictions and forcing producers to label sulfur-treated goods. The cheerful glow of golden apricots faded into something unsettling, a reminder that the prettiest foods were not always the safest. Families returned to canning or buying darker, untreated fruit, even if it looked less appealing. This was the start of a broader mistrust toward chemical additives, the kind that would define food culture for decades to come. In the name of convenience, something pure had been lost. Spice cake with seafoam frosting was a Christmas tradition that combined warm spices with one of the most ethereal frostings ever created. The cake itself was a study in balance, with cinnamon, ginger, cloves, nutmeg, and allspice, working together without any single flavor dominating. Brown, bright, bold, and eye-catching, color mattered in the 1960s food industry, and few additives were as widely used as Red No. 2 or amaranth. From candies to cake frosting, this synthetic dye gave processed foods an irresistible vibrancy. It was cheap, effective, and made everything look more appealing. But what manufacturers saw as a marketing advantage, scientists would later recognize as a serious health risk. At the time, food dyes weren't scrutinized as heavily as they are today. The general belief was that if a product made it to store shelves, it had to be safe. Red No. 2 was everywhere, with little concern for long-term effects. But as research advanced, animal studies suggested a troubling connection between this popular dye and potential carcinogenic properties. Though the data wasn't conclusive for humans, the idea of a cancer-causing colorant lurking in everyday foods was enough to raise alarms. Public pressure mounted, and by the 1970s, the FDA banned Red No. 2 in the US, following similar actions in Europe. While other artificial dyes remained in use, this case marked a turning point in food safety regulations. Dumplings? In my historically accurate assessment of the Depression? Impossible, right? Well, actually, if we really get technical about the details, cabbage and water dumplings were some of the best things to eat during the Depression. They were always called water dumplings, but don't get any ideas. These were on a completely different spectrum from your typical dumplings. As usual, if it was something that people ate in the Depression almost regularly, that meant that it was affordable. Cabbage was actually the spitting image of economical, really, and that's because it was free. Not catching my drift? Well, most people started growing things like cabbage in their victory gardens. These were backyard patches of fertile soil that people started planting on to get some food on the side. Water was already something that people already had for free, so when you mix the two together to make a filling for dumplings, you actually get a pretty decent and easy-to-prepare snack. All you need is water, salt, cabbage, and some flour or a substitute for it. Then, you just prepare the dough and drop it right into the broth. They're actually even softer than your typical steamed dumplings, if you can believe it. The best part about this recipe was probably the way it didn't need yeast or flour at all to make it work. Usually with steamed dumplings, you need either of the two or both to make the dumplings rise, but these ones worked on their own. Even today, some places do still enjoy their fair share of vegetable and water-based dumplings, but it's largely become a forgotten tradition now thanks to all the other options we have when it comes to dumplings. Hominy walnut cake showcased one of America's most distinctive native nuts, with a flavor so intense it divided families into passionate admirers and determined avoiders. Black walnuts grew wild across the eastern United States, and gathering them each fall was a messy, labor-intensive process that stained hands for weeks. The nuts had a bold, almost wine-like flavor with hints of smoke and earth that English walnuts could never match. Bakers folded them generously into butter cake batter and pressed them into caramel or cream cheese frosting. The strong flavor meant a little went far, but true devotees packed their cakes with as many nuts as the batter could hold. Rural families who gathered their own black walnuts considered them precious, using them only for special occasions like Christmas. The cakes were dense and richly flavored, perfect for slicing thin and savoring slowly. Though black walnuts can still be found, the labor of gathering and shelling them has made this cake increasingly rare. Gravy over biscuits brought Southern breakfast tradition to the Christmas dessert table, stretching cocoa and sugar into something that tasted far richer than its humble origins. The gravy was made by cooking cocoa powder, sugar, flour, and milk together until thickened into a glossy, pourable sauce. Hot biscuits, split open and waiting, soaked up the warm chocolate until they became soft, almost pudding-like beneath their crusty tops. The combination cost pennies yet delivered chocolate satisfaction that expensive cakes could not surpass. Children would eat 3 or 4 biscuits drowning in gravy, their faces smeared with chocolate and happiness. Families stretched the recipe further by using leftover biscuits from breakfast, ensuring nothing went to waste. The gravy could be made in minutes, perfect for Christmas morning when other demands competed for attention. Chocolate gravy proved that poverty and pleasure were not opposites but partners. Unpasteurized apple cider once defined autumn. It was the flavor of harvest festivals, sold in glass jugs that fogged with sweetness and memory. But as food safety laws tightened, the raw, unpasteurized kind came under fire. Cases of foodborne illness were traced back to small farms that lacked modern sanitation. It was not just a warning, it was a crackdown. Inspectors forced producers to pasteurize or stop selling altogether. The raw cider that once poured straight from the press into the bottle was now filtered, heated, and sterilized into submission. The taste changed, and so did the trust. Consumers were safer, but something simple was lost: the crisp tang of apples that still tasted like the orchard they came from. For many rural families, it marked the slow death of local flavor, replaced by When families had no extra pennies to spare during the Depression, every ounce of a home-slaughtered hog held culinary promise, including the fat, which found new life in kitchens as rendered lard. Households meticulously melted down pork fat, transforming it into creamy, shelf-stable lard used to fry, bake, or season just about everything, from pie crusts to biscuits. Back then, lard wasn't viewed suspiciously as it is today. Cookbooks proudly praised it as the secret to perfectly flaky pie crusts, biscuits, and even pastries, because sometimes butter wasn't just scarce, it was downright extravagant. Ironically, modern chefs have recently rediscovered lard's benefits in baking, calling it the Forgotten Fat Cake, held a place of honor on Christmas sideboards across America, its buttery richness requiring no frosting or embellishment to impress. The traditional recipe called for a pound each of butter, sugar, eggs, and flour, creating a dense golden cake that sliced cleanly and kept for weeks. Christmas versions often incorporated brandy, bourbon, or rum that perfumed each slice with holiday spirit. Some bakers added citrus zest, nutmeg, or vanilla to personalize their recipes, but the best pound cakes let the pure flavor of butter and eggs shine through. The cakes were baked slowly in tube pans until they developed a crisp, caramelized crust that gave way to a tender, fine-grained interior. Hostesses served pound cake with coffee after Christmas dinner or alongside fruit and whipped cream for a simple but elegant dessert. The cake's long shelf life made it perfect for unexpected holiday visitors. Pound cake represented restraint and quality over showiness. Sugar cookies were the democratic dessert of 1950s Christmas, requiring only flour, sugar, butter, eggs, and vanilla to create magic. The dough rolled out smooth and flat, ready for cookie cutters in every holiday shape imaginable: stars, bells, trees, and Santa faces. Children gathered around kitchen tables, pressing cutters into dough and carefully transferring shapes to baking sheets. Plain cookies were beautiful enough, but colored sugar or simple icing transformed them into edible art. The recipe yielded dozens of cookies from basic ingredients, making them perfect for classroom parties and neighbor gifts. Mistakes could be re-rolled and cut again, ensuring nothing went to waste. The cookies kept for weeks in tins, their crisp texture giving way to buttery sweetness with each bite. Sugar cookies represented Christmas itself, the smell of them baking signaling that the season had truly arrived at last. Corporate caution. Lead-glazed ceramic cookware was once a kitchen treasure, bright, colorful, and imported from distant markets. Housewives displayed it proudly, unaware that each stew, soup, and sauce was quietly absorbing poison. When researchers discovered that the glazes leached lead into food, the shock spread fast. Imported pottery from Mexico, Italy, and even local artisans was pulled from stores. Families who had used the same pots for years were told to throw them away. It was a betrayal hidden in beauty, something meant to serve now seen as a silent killer. The government issued warnings, but for many, the damage was already done. The ban marked a turning point in how Americans thought about aesthetics and safety. A pot could be gorgeous and deadly at once. The message was clear. In the modern kitchen, trust had to be earned, not painted on. Lemon cheesecake was not the dense New York-style cheesecake modern diners know, but a delicate layer cake filled with homemade lemon curd that brightened winter holiday tables. The cake layers were tender white or yellow cake, light enough to let the filling shine. The lemon cheese filling was a cooked custard of eggs, sugar, butter, and fresh lemon juice that thickened into a glossy, intensely flavored curd. Making the filling required constant stirring over gentle heat to prevent curdling, a task that demanded patience and attention. The tartness of the lemon cut through the richness of holiday meals, providing a refreshing contrast to heavier desserts. 7-minute frosting or simple powdered sugar dusting typically topped the cake. Families in the South treasured their lemon cheese recipes, passing them down through generations. The cake was often made when winter citrus arrived in markets, a seasonal treat that announced the holidays had truly begun. Fruit cocktail cake transformed a single can of mixed fruit into a moist, tender cake that required almost no effort or expense to prepare. The canned fruit, juice and all, was mixed directly into a simple batter of flour, sugar, eggs, and baking soda without draining. As the cake baked, the fruit distributed throughout, each bite offering surprise bursts of peach, pear, cherry, and grape that delighted children. The juice kept the cake incredibly moist while adding natural sweetness that reduced the need for expensive refined sugar. A brown sugar and coconut topping broiled until bubbling and caramelized made the cake look fancy enough for company. Canned fruit cocktail cost pennies and was available in every grocery store, making this cake accessible to families on the tightest budgets. The recipe required no mixer, no complicated technique, just a bowl and a spoon and 15 minutes of effort. Fruit cocktail cake proved that convenience and deliciousness could share the same baking pan beautifully. Apple was once the taste of paradise in post-war America, a can of sunshine, promising escape from gray winters and rationed years. Housewives opened them for cakes, salads, and family desserts, the syrupy scent filling kitchens with tropical fantasy. But whispers began to spread that some factories were using formaldehyde to preserve the fruit's color and texture. The idea horrified the public. A chemical used for embalming had no place in something so sweet. When investigations proved the rumors true in overseas plants, the backlash was swift and merciless. Imports were banned, and brands raced to distance themselves from the scandal. Advertisements shifted tone, emphasizing purity, safety, and American production. But the trust had already curdled. What had once symbolized innocence and modern convenience now tasted of deception. The Food and Drug Administration outlawed the practice entirely, yet the damage lingered. Housewives began reading labels with suspicion, and the word preservative lost its comforting tone. Tinned pineapple still glistened in syrup, but its glow now carried a warning. The sweetness of the modern kitchen had revealed its hidden cost, a price paid not in money, but in faith. Mahogany cake earned its name from the rich, dark color produced by combining chocolate and spices in a single batter. Unlike pure chocolate cakes, mahogany cake included warming spices like cinnamon, cloves, and sometimes coffee that gave it remarkable depth. The chocolate was typically cocoa powder rather than melted chocolate, creating a lighter texture that let the spices shine through. Brown sugar and molasses contributed to both the color and the distinctive flavor, adding caramel undertones that made each bite interesting. The cake was often frosted with chocolate or mocha buttercream, or sometimes a simple chocolate glaze that enhanced its glossy appearance. Mahogany cake represented the sophisticated side of 1950s holiday baking, a dessert for adults who appreciated nuance over simple sweetness. The combination of chocolate and spice was unusual enough to spark conversation. Emerged from the 1950s as a frugal baker's triumph, using inexpensive oats to create something that tasted almost like a fancy German chocolate cake. Rolled oats were soaked in boiling water until soft, then mixed into a batter with brown sugar, eggs, and vanilla. The cake baked into a moist, almost pudding-like texture that needed no frosting to satisfy. But the traditional topping made it special, a broiled mixture of coconut, brown sugar, butter, and evaporated milk that bubbled and caramelized under the heat. The whole dessert cost a fraction of traditional layer cakes, yet delivered that same celebratory feeling. Oats were among the cheapest grains available, and the topping used shelf-stable ingredients every pantry contained. The cake traveled well and actually improved overnight as the flavors melded together. Oatmeal cake represented ingenuity that turned breakfast cereal into Christmas celebration. Pocket, a beloved toy line that captivated children with its miniature dolls and accessories, faced a significant challenge in 2007. The quick-click versions of these toys, designed for easy outfit changes with magnetic accessories, soon revealed a critical flaw. The magnets, prone to detaching during play, posed serious ingestion risks, leading to surgeries and heightened safety concerns. This incident highlighted the unforeseen dangers of magnetic toys and prompted a recall, underscoring the importance of rigorous product testing and design evaluation. The Polly Pocket recall serves as a crucial reminder in the toy industry to prioritize the safety of even the smallest components, ensuring that children's play remains safe and enjoyable. In the mid-20th century, sweetness wasn't just a preference, it was a selling point. Jewel-toned centerpieces found on mid-century Christmas tables, built from gelatin canned fruit and decorative molds. The mixture set into a scalloped ring that held cherries and pineapple pieces suspended like stained glass. It brought color to winter meals and added a sweet chilled side dish to balance heavier foods. This mold reflected a time when appearance was as important as flavor, and holiday tables were dressed in vivid colors. Eventually, gelatin salads faded from style, but this dish remains iconic within vintage Betty Crocker collections. It recalled an era when hospitality meant crafting something eye-catching even with inexpensive ingredients, and when molded salads were considered the height of festive creativity. The shimmer of fruit beneath the surface made every table look a little more cheerful. Snow ice cream appeared like magic after winter storms, requiring nothing more than fresh fallen snow, sugar, vanilla, and milk or cream. Children would rush outside with large bowls to gather clean snow, while mothers prepared the simple mixture inside the warm kitchen. The snow was folded gently into sweetened vanilla milk, creating instant soft serve that tasted like frozen wonder and winter itself. The dessert cost essentially nothing and could only be made during those special snowy days, making it feel even more precious and exciting. Families developed their own secret recipes, some adding cocoa for chocolate snow cream or canned fruit for fruity variations. The ice cream had to be eaten immediately before it melted, creating a flurry of happy spoons and sticky faces around the kitchen table. Snow ice cream connected children to the weather and the season in ways store-bought treats never could. Few products embodied this better than sweetened condensed milk with excessive sugar. A staple in many households, this thick, syrupy dairy product was beloved for its versatility, affordability, and long shelf life. It made its way into pies, coffee, and even baby formula. But for all its convenience, there was one problem. Some brands packed in so much sugar that it was closer to candy than milk. During the 1960s, food manufacturers weren't required to disclose sugar content as rigorously as they are today. Without standardized labeling, some versions contained sugar levels far beyond what would now be considered safe for daily consumption. The excess wasn't just about taste, it was a cheap preservative, extending the product's shelf life and making it more appealing to budget-conscious shoppers. But as studies linked high sugar intake to obesity, diabetes, and heart disease, health experts began sounding the alarm. By the late 20th century, regulations introduced stricter labeling requirements and sugar content in condensed milk was brought under control. Which 1930s survival dish would you bring back to your kitchen? Drop your grandmother's Depression-era recipes and memories in the comments. Hit like and subscribe so you never miss more forgotten flavors from American history.